It's terrible that after 50 years it is behind closed doors. And I've no intention, now I've started to stop now. I'm determined to put an end to this. Terrible.
The decision lasted less than a minute, but its impact tore through the palace with the force of a declaration of war. Queen Camilla had entered the private council chamber, expecting a compromise. Instead, she heard officials confirm that Princess Anne, not the Queen Consort, held the exclusive personal rights to Queen Elizabeth's treasured Balmoral Thistle Brooch. Camilla pushed back her chair, fixed Charles with a wounded stare, and stormed through the closing doors. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The ruling changed everything. A private council chamber is a closed palace room where officials settle sensitive royal matters, and its purpose was clear. The signed deed of gift, an ownership document transferring a possession, named Anne alone. Elizabeth's private jewel inventory, the official list recording belongings she owned outside the crown, carried the answer. Because the brooch was personal property, rather than part of the institution's ceremonial collection, the late monarch had been free to leave it to her daughter. Camilla had expected her position to outweigh that distinction. As Queen Consort, meaning the wife of the reigning sovereign, rather than the monarch in her own right, she believed ceremonial priority should permit her to wear the jewel at an approaching Scottish engagement. Charles knew what she wanted from him. She leaned toward her husband and demanded that he delay the confirmation, but the king remained seated. His silence did not feel neutral. To her, it felt like abandonment delivered in front of witnesses. The keeper of the privy purse opened a burgundy folder. That official manages the sovereign's finances and property records, and his finger stopped beside Elizabeth's handwritten initials and Anne's name. The keeper repeated the finding carefully. Ownership and wearing rights belonged solely to the Princess Royal, a title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter. Camilla removed her reading glasses. Her hand trembled once before she placed them on the table. "Then you have already decided where I stand," she said. Charles rose too late. Camilla drove her chair backward, turned from him, and crossed the room without accepting another word. The door closed with a force that silenced every official inside. Yet the deepest shock was still waiting. Anne had not attended the meeting, and she did not yet know how violently the confirmation had landed. Would she receive her mother's final gift with quiet sorrow, or confront the woman who had tried to claim it? As Camilla's footsteps faded down the corridor, the palace turned toward two women, divided by one jewel, and by two painfully different meanings of inheritance. For Camilla, the brooch represents recognition, proof that she has finally been accepted at the center of royal history. For Anne, it carries something far more private, the memory of a mother who rarely expressed tenderness openly. That difference transforms a dispute over diamonds and sapphires into a battle over belonging. One woman sees the jewel as part of the Queen's ceremonial role. The other remembers Elizabeth fastening it with her own hands. Anne carries that memory back to childhood visits at Balmoral, the royal family's privately owned Scottish estate. During quiet dinners and Highland gatherings, she watched her mother reach for the thistle-shaped jewel whenever duty softened into family life. Now, alone in her sitting room, she opens a small photograph album and stops at an image of Elizabeth standing beside Prince Philip. The brooch rests near the monarch's heart. Her father is smiling, but it is her mother's hand Anne remembers, the same hand that once fastened the piece onto her daughter's coat and told her to keep still. That memory makes surrender impossible. Anne closes the album, yet she cannot silence the pain behind it. The jewel is not valuable to her because of its diamonds or sapphires. It matters because Elizabeth rarely expressed tenderness directly, and every private gesture carried enormous weight. Losing the brooch would feel like losing one of the few promises her mother had left specifically for her. Across the palace, Camilla feels a different wound opening. She tells Charles that the ruling has reduced her position to a costume others may accept only when convenient. As Queen Consort, the wife of the reigning king rather than the sovereign herself, she performs the ceremonial duties of queenship without holding the monarch's independent authority. Advisors had selected the brooch for an approaching Scottish ceremony because its thistle design connected Elizabeth's reign to the present crown. Camilla believed wearing it would signal continuity. Now she fears the rejection signals something colder, that the family still sees her as temporary. Charles tries to reassure his wife, but she hears caution instead of loyalty. Camilla asks whether Anne would have challenged any other queen so openly. He does not answer. The silence deepens her suspicion that this argument was never merely about ownership. The hidden record makes everything worse. A documented account, a written testimony preserved in palace files, from Elizabeth's former dresser, describes a difficult family Christmas years earlier. After an argument left Anne shaken, the monarch privately promised her daughter the brooch, saying it should remain with the person who understood its memories. The dresser recorded that promise soon afterward, giving officials evidence beyond sentiment. William then receives another disturbing detail: a secure collection, meaning the protected storage system used for valuable royal possessions, had received a request from Camilla's office 3 weeks before ownership was settled. The future king reads the date twice. She had not merely hoped to wear the brooch, her household had already begun arranging its release. That discovery points towards something sharper than grief. To understand why the palace council became unavoidable, the story must return to the evening at Windsor, when Anne realized her mother's jewel was already being prepared for someone else. The crisis began months earlier, not inside a council chamber, but beside an open jewel case at Windsor Castle. During preparations for a Scottish state reception, Anne discovered that the Balmoral Thistle Brooch had been removed from its usual compartment and scheduled for delivery to Camilla's dresser. She did not shout. She simply placed one hand on the case and asked the royal jeweler a question that froze everyone nearby. "Who authorized this?" The jeweler hesitated before producing a written wardrobe request dated 14 November. A Scottish state reception is a formal royal gathering held to welcome guests while honoring the monarchy's connection to Scotland, and the brooch had been selected as its emotional centerpiece. The dresser, an attendant responsible for preparing a royal woman's clothing and jewelry, was expected to receive it that afternoon. Camilla's signature was absent, but the instruction had come directly from her household. Anne read every line. The piece had remained in protected storage, while Elizabeth's possessions were divided into 2 categories: items she had personally owned and treasures belonging permanently to the crown, meaning the institution rather than an individual family member. The final private inventory had not yet circulated. That inventory was the official record identifying who legally received each personal possession. Camilla's staff had therefore treated the brooch as available to the reigning queen. That explanation did not calm Anne. It made the transfer feel worse. Administrative convenience was about to erase a promise her mother had made in private, and once the jewel appeared on Camilla, the public would naturally assume it belonged to her. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the sovereign's eldest daughter, ordered the jeweler to return the piece to its compartment. He obeyed, but warned that the decision would reach the Queen Consort within minutes. Camilla received the call before the rehearsal ended. She heard that Anne had personally stopped the delivery, then asked her dresser to repeat the message. Her humiliation hardened into fury. To her, this was no longer a daughter protecting an inheritance. It was a deliberate challenge to her legitimacy, delivered through staff before an important ceremony. Charles contacted his sister that evening. He asked Anne to avoid creating another family battlefield, reminding her that the monarchy was already carrying old wounds. She refused. Silence, she told the king, would make her complicit in rewriting Elizabeth's decision, simply because the truth had become inconvenient. The recorded follow-up conversation preserved what happened next. In that palace recording, Anne instructed officials to seal the jewel until Elizabeth's signed deed, an ownership document carrying legal authority, and handwritten inventory could be examined together. She repeated the order slowly. No release, no fitting, no exceptions. The sealed case bought her time, but it also made peace impossible. When Camilla learned that Anne had blocked the transfer and demanded an investigation, she requested a private face-to-face meeting. She arrived, determined to force the Princess Royal into surrendering the claim, carrying years of resentment into a room where neither woman intended to retreat. There are confrontations that begin with raised voices, and others made more dangerous by restraint. Anne enters the private drawing room without an aide. Camilla is already waiting beside the fireplace, the disputed wardrobe request resting on a table between them. For several seconds, neither woman sits. Then the Queen Consort asks whether the Princess Royal truly intends to embarrass her over a single brooch. Anne's response cuts deeper than anger. "This is about respecting my mother." Camilla points toward the empty chair, but Anne remains standing. Charles arranged this private meeting because he feared formal mediation, a structured discussion led by palace officials, would transform a family disagreement into a constitutional embarrassment. Such embarrassment matters because any visible conflict between senior royals can weaken public confidence in the unity behind the crown. The king believed privacy might soften both women. Instead, it removed every barrier between them. Camilla begins with what she considers a compromise. She will wear the Balmoral Thistle Brooch once, at the Scottish ceremony, return it immediately afterward, and never claim legal ownership. To her, the jewel would connect Elizabeth's reign to the present, and reassure a public still mourning the late monarch. Anne hears something entirely different. One ceremonial appearance could create a lasting expectation that the brooch remained available to the reigning queen whenever tradition demanded it. Anne refuses. She reminds Camilla that Elizabeth's gift was personal, not institutional, and therefore could not be negotiated for convenience. The Queen Consort answers that wearing the piece in Scotland would honor the woman who carried it for decades. Her opponent steps closer. "Honoring my mother begins with obeying what she wanted," she says, holding her voice steady, even as grief tightens every word. Camilla's restraint finally breaks. She accuses Anne of using sorrow as a weapon, and suggests that the dispute is really an attempt to deny her place within royal history. The Princess Royal does not retreat. A royal position, she answers, may grant ceremonial precedence, the formal order deciding who takes priority at official events, but it does not create personal inheritance. Rank cannot transform another woman's promise into palace property. The accusation hangs between them. Camilla insists she is not trying to replace Elizabeth, but Anne answers that wearing the late queen's most personal jewels risks creating precisely that impression. She tells her that queenship can be inherited through marriage and ceremony. A mother's trust cannot. Charles enters after hearing their voices beyond the closed door. Both women turn toward him, each expecting a judgment. Camilla asks her husband to confirm that continuity serves the monarchy. Anne asks her brother whether their mother's written wishes still carry meaning. The king opens his mouth, but no answer comes. His silence destroys the final hope of compromise. Camilla sees weakness. Anne sees fear. With the private conversation shattered, the decision can no longer remain inside the family. Officials must now examine records carrying more authority than Charles' desire for peace. The emotional battle has reached its deadlock. Next, a signature from Elizabeth's final years will decide what affection, rank, and persuasion could not. The most decisive voice in the room belongs to someone who is no longer alive. Elizabeth's signature appears beneath a short deed describing the Balmoral Thistle Brooch as a personal gift to her daughter, effective upon her death. Charles reads the sentence twice. Around him, advisors remain silent. Camilla watches his face, searching for the intervention she still believes he can deliver. Instead, the king places the document flat upon the table and withdraws his hand. The evidence leaves almost no space for argument. The palace's private property committee, a small group responsible for deciding which possessions belong to individual royals, has examined 4 connected records. The deed legally transfers ownership. The jewel inventory identifies where the brooch was stored. An insurance schedule traces who was responsible for protecting it, while a documented account from Elizabeth's former dresser records the promise she made to Anne. Charles asks whether his authority can pause the transfer. An advisor answers carefully. The sovereign, meaning the reigning monarch, controls crown jewels on behalf of the institution. But this brooch never entered that collection. It remained Elizabeth's personal property. Her bequest, a gift formerly left to someone after death, is valid, and no king can reassign it merely to solve an uncomfortable ceremonial dispute. Camilla turns toward her husband. She reminds him that she never asked to own the brooch permanently, only to wear it during one Scottish engagement. Charles understands the plea beneath her words. As monarch, he must defend the integrity of royal records. As a husband, he can see the decision isolating the woman beside him. Every lawful sentence protecting his mother's wishes seems to push his wife further outside the family. William breaks the silence. He tells his father quietly that overturning the gift would hurt Anne far beyond the loss of one jewel. It would suggest that Elizabeth's private promises remained negotiable after her death, whenever palace convenience demanded it. The future king warns that once the family weakens one documented wish, every other personal inheritance could be questioned. Charles turns another page and finds the deeper revelation. The deed instructs that the brooch should eventually pass through Elizabeth's direct descendants, according to Anne's judgment. She is not merely its owner. She has been trusted to decide its future. The inventory delivers the final blow. Beside the entry for the thistle-shaped jewel, the late monarch has written in pencil, "For A." She understands why. William reads the words over his father's shoulder. Anne's claim is suddenly more than legal. It is the surviving mark of an emotional understanding between mother and daughter. Camilla stops asking for intervention. She recognizes that Charles cannot overrule the signature without betraying both Elizabeth and Anne. Yet accepting the evidence does not mean accepting how the palace intends to reveal it. The king closes the file and gives permission for a formal confirmation. Someone must now tell Camilla that the announcement will proceed without her approval. The records have settled ownership, but the words chosen to make that truth official are about to turn her private defeat into a visible royal rupture. By the following morning, Camilla's empty chair says more than any palace statement. She does not attend the scheduled household briefing. Her folders remain untouched, and the breakfast tray outside her rooms is carried away almost exactly as it arrived. Yet the machinery of monarchy moves forward. Anne's ownership is entered into the final register. The brooch is removed from the Queen Consort's ceremonial options, and Charles is left to confront what his silence has cost. The confirmation takes effect immediately. A household briefing is the private meeting where senior staff coordinate duties, schedules, and official appearances for a royal residence. Camilla's absence, therefore, cannot be dismissed as a missed conversation. Her team must now work without her while officials enter Anne's ownership into the final register, the permanent palace record identifying who legally controls the jewel. Staff revise the approaching Scottish ceremony within hours. They remove every reference to the Balmoral Thistle Brooch from the wardrobe plan and replace it with a different piece. Camilla's household can no longer request, display, or schedule Elizabeth's jewel without Anne's written permission. That restriction matters because even a temporary appearance could imply continuing access. The new entry closes that possibility completely. Camilla dismisses her dresser before the woman can discuss alternatives. Left alone, she stares at the empty space where the brooch's presentation box was expected to rest. The Queen Consort had imagined wearing it as proof of continuity. Now the absence feels like a judgment. She may occupy the role, but she cannot inherit every symbol belonging to the woman who came before her. Charles knocks once and enters. He calls the ruling procedural, hoping that careful language might separate law from emotion. Camilla refuses the distinction. Procedures reveal where loyalty truly lies, she tells him. The king reminds her that he could not invalidate his mother's signature. She answers that he did not need to destroy the document. He only needed to make her feel that she was not facing it alone. The fallout soon escapes the room. Camilla cancels 2 scheduled engagements under the explanation of fatigue. Because senior royals are expected to maintain public duties during personal strain, both withdrawals immediately fuel concern that the dispute has begun affecting the monarchy's work. Her dresser offers to restore one appearance, but she refuses again. Anne receives the brooch that afternoon, inside a sealed blue case. She signs the transfer record, carries the case into her sitting room, and places it beside a photograph of Elizabeth. Yet she does not open it. There is no smile, no celebration, no sense of victory. The daughter who fought so fiercely for the jewel cannot bring herself to look at what she has finally secured. Charles learns of that reaction through a documented note from the official who delivered the case. The detail changes everything. Anne was never fighting to defeat Camilla. She was fighting not to lose Elizabeth again. The king now understands that legal confirmation has solved nothing inside the family. He arranges one final private meeting with his sister, hoping that without officials, documents, or wounded pride between them, Anne will reveal what the brooch truly means, and what their mother was trying to preserve. With no advisors, no folders, and no titles spoken between them, Charles sits opposite Anne, in the room where Elizabeth once took afternoon tea. The brooch remains closed inside its case. He asks why she fought so fiercely for something she cannot yet bear to look at. Anne's composure finally breaks. She tells her brother that their mother gave few sentimental promises, and that allowing this one to disappear would make every private memory feel vulnerable. Charles lets the silence remain. He invited his sister, because the legal dispute had ended, while the emotional fracture inside the family had only deepened. Here, they speak as Elizabeth's children, rather than as sovereign and Princess Royal. The sovereign is the reigning monarch, while Princess Royal is the title traditionally granted to his eldest sister. Removing those formal roles allows them to face the grief that palace procedure kept hidden. Anne places one hand on the blue case. She admits that Camilla's planned appearance frightened her, for reasons she struggled to explain during the confrontation. If the Queen Consort wore the brooch as part of her official duties, a private connection between mother and daughter would become an accessory of office. The public might admire it. The palace might celebrate continuity. But Elizabeth's personal promise would slowly disappear beneath ceremony. Charles lowers his voice. In the recorded private conversation, preserved for the family archive, he confesses that his hesitation was never indifference. Supporting Anne immediately could have permanently wounded his wife. Supporting Camilla would have betrayed his mother and sister. The king believed silence might prevent greater damage. Instead, it left both women feeling abandoned. Anne finally opens the case. She lifts the brooch, then notices resistance beneath the lining. A folded card has been hidden underneath. The handwriting belongs to Elizabeth. Her message is painfully brief. For Anne, with gratitude for your steadiness when others could not be steady. The words break what remains of her control. Anne reads them again, while Charles turns away for a moment before asking to see the card. Their mother had not chosen the jewel casually. She had used it to acknowledge the daughter who carried duty without demanding praise. The inheritance was not simply a reward. It was Elizabeth's quiet confession that she had noticed every sacrifice. Charles asks what Anne will do now. She decides to wear the brooch once at the next Balmoral Remembrance Service, a private royal gathering honoring deceased family members at their Scottish home. She will not wear it as a victory over Camilla. She will wear it as an acknowledgement of the promise, and then return it to safekeeping. The decision gives the king something law could not provide: meaning. Yet the moment Anne agrees to wear the jewel publicly, the story escapes the family's control. Palace officials announce the appearance through a formal statement, and the private inheritance becomes a national symbol. The brooch will no longer remain hidden behind sealed doors. When Anne steps forward wearing it, the world will interpret everything the palace tried to contain, and Camilla will be forced to witness the public verdict. At Balmoral's memorial service, Anne steps from her car wearing a dark navy coat and Elizabeth's thistle brooch above her heart. The waiting crowd recognizes it almost immediately. A murmur moves across the barriers before turning into sustained applause. Anne pauses only once, pressing her fingers lightly against the jewel. By midday, that single gesture has eclipsed every palace briefing and transformed an inheritance dispute into a national conversation about duty, memory, and a daughter's grief. The palace statement chooses every word carefully. A royal memorial service is a gathering held to honor a deceased member of the family through prayer, music, and remembrance. Officials describe Anne's appearance as the fulfillment of Elizabeth's documented personal wish. They avoid the words victory, defeat, and ownership battle. Yet the public already understands that the brooch has settled something rank alone could not decide. Broadcasters explain the crucial distinction. Personal royal property belongs to an individual family member and can be given away through a private inheritance. Institutional jewels belong to the crown itself and remain available for official use across successive reigns. Elizabeth personally owned the thistle brooch. That meant her choice, not Camilla's status as queen, determined who could claim it. Anne maintains her composure as the service begins. Then her mother's favorite hymn fills the gathering, and her fingers return to the jewel. William notices the movement. He steps closer and quietly steadies his aunt's arm, allowing her one private second of weakness without exposing it as collapse. The future king says nothing, but Anne understands. This is not triumph. It is grief, finally given a shape. Camilla watches the coverage away from the gathering. When the applause is replayed, she turns off the television and sits in silence. The Queen Consort initially refuses to discuss the broadcast, but later calls her dresser back into the room. She asks the attendant to save the official photograph of Anne wearing the brooch. The request is quiet, almost reluctant, yet it reveals that anger is beginning to give way to recognition. The public verdict arrives the next morning. One newspaper places Anne's photograph across its front page beneath 4 words: her mother's choice. The accompanying account describes the inheritance as Elizabeth's final personal act of trust, not a calculated rejection of Camilla. Outside Buckingham Palace, another moment captures the country's feeling more powerfully than any headline. A woman approaches the gates and leaves a small bouquet of Scottish thistles beneath Anne's photograph. Her card reads, "For a daughter keeping her mother's promise." Others stop beside it, and within an hour more flowers surround the first offering. Camilla sees that image in the morning press. She now understands that reversing the decision would not merely challenge Anne, it would challenge the public meaning attached to Elizabeth's final wish. The nation has accepted the brooch's rightful place. Only one decision remains. Anne and Camilla must either preserve their resentment or allow the jewel that divided them to establish the boundary that finally restores peace. The dispute ends without another slammed door. Days after the Balmoral service, Camilla asks to meet Anne privately and arrives carrying no aids, legal papers, or competing proposal. She acknowledges that the brooch was Elizabeth's to give and Anne's to keep. The Princess Royal does not demand an apology before accepting it. Instead, she closes the jewel case and says that protecting one personal promise never required destroying another relationship. At last, the battle loses its power. Camilla sits opposite Anne and admits what pride had concealed. Her anger came from an old fear of remaining an outsider, even after reaching the highest ceremonial position beside the sovereign. The Queen Consort, the wife of the reigning monarch rather than a ruler in her own right, believed wearing Elizabeth's brooch would prove that the family had fully accepted her. Losing access reopened every doubt she thought the crown had buried. Anne listens without interrupting. When Camilla finishes, she explains that accepting Elizabeth's boundary does not diminish the present queen's place. The brooch belonged to a mother who chose to leave it to her daughter. Protecting that connection was never meant to deny another woman's dignity. It simply prevented royal status from consuming something deeply personal. Camilla then reveals, during that private conversation, that she saved the official Balmoral photograph. The expression on Anne's face had shown her what no deed, inventory, or committee could explain. She had not seen triumph. She had seen a daughter struggling to remain composed while carrying the final message of a mother she still mourned. Anne reaches across the table and turns the closed case away from them both. The gesture carries no victory and demands no surrender. Camilla accepts that the jewel will remain beyond her ceremonial reach. In return, Anne acknowledges that the conflict exposed a wound the family can no longer pretend does not exist. The palace finalizes its register with Anne, named as sole owner and custodian, the person legally trusted to protect the brooch and decide its future. Camilla's Scottish ceremonial wardrobe is redesigned around jewels connected to her own reign. Those pieces give her something borrowed symbols never could, an identity that does not depend upon resembling Elizabeth. Charles later watches the two women leave through the same doorway. They are not suddenly close, and years of tension have not vanished. Yet neither turns away in anger. The king understands that restraint has achieved what his authority could not. His mother's documented wish remains intact, his sister's inheritance is protected, and his wife has finally accepted a boundary without treating it as rejection. Anne keeps the brooch. Camilla accepts the ruling. Charles upholds Elizabeth's choice. The monarchy survives the dispute because rank is not allowed to consume every private bond. Even within the crown, love can create boundaries that power must respect. Elizabeth's brooch remains with Anne, not as a trophy taken from Camilla, but as a fulfilled promise, an accepted limit, and the final proof that a monarch's most personal choices can outlive the throne itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.